Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today, March 25th, is Tolkien Reading Day. And every year to celebrate, several members of the Tolkien YouTube community collaborate on a Tolkien Reading Day playlist. Some of the big channels participate, like In Deep Geek and Men of the West, as well as some of the smaller channels, like yours truly. I'll put a link to the playlist at the end of the video and in the description. This year's theme is love and friendship. And as it happens, there's a topic that several commenters have requested, including Larissa and Christian Fiorito, that fits in perfectly with this theme. That topic is the relationship between Aegnor and Andreth, the first recorded elven-human relationship in the chronology of Middle-earth. Okay, first, let's get the backstory for this. Aegnor and Andreth are probably the most obscure of our notable elven-human pairings. The big three would be Beren and Luthien, Tuor and Idril, and Aragorn and Arwen. And there are other half-elven pairings as well, but all of those relationships post-date Aegnor and Andreth. As I mentioned, they're the first. And another unique feature of this relationship is that, unlike the big three, Andreth is a human woman in love with Aegnor, the brother of Galadriel. Now, Tolkien wrote about this relationship in a passage called Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth. There's a lot of thuths in there, but aka the debate of Finrod and Andreth. It's in the History of Middle-earth compendium. Finrod is also the brother of Aegnor and Galadriel. It's notable that Tolkien leaves Aegnor out of this conversation. It's an in-depth, heartfelt discussion between Andreth and the brother of her true love. It's odd, but I think Tolkien's reasoning is that this impassioned conversation changes Finrod's perspective, and as it happens, dramatically impacts the fate of Middle-earth. Just put a pin in that because we'll come back to it. Andreth is a wise woman from the house of Beor. She will eventually be the great-aunt of Beren. Aegnor and his brother Angrod rule the realm of Dorthonion, and that is where Andreth and Aegnor meet and fall in love. Flash forward a few decades to the year 410 of the First Age, so thousands of years before the War of the Ring. Finrod has found that he can talk philosophy and get an honest human perspective from Andreth, and he has many conversations with her, of which one of these conversations, I believe the last conversation, appears in the History of Middle-earth. I know I'm burying the lead on this conversation, but I want to give one more bit of backstory first. The year 410 happens during the Siege of Angband, arguably the most peaceful era for the elves in the First Age. That siege is going to be broken by the Battle of Sudden Flame in 455. But for now, all is well. Sometime before the year 410, before this conversation, Galadriel goes to visit her brother Finrod in his realm of Nargothrond. And as sisters do, she asks him about his relationship status. Silmarillion, chapter 15. It came to pass that Nargothrond was full wrought, and the sons of Finarfin were gathered there to a feast. And Galadriel came from Doriath, and dwelt a while in Nargothrond. Now King Finrod Felagund had no wife, and Galadriel asked him why this should be. But foresight came upon Felagund as she spoke, and he said, "An oath I too shall swear, and must be free to fulfill it, and go into darkness. Nor shall anything of my realm endure that a son should inherit." But it is said that not until that hour had such cold thoughts ruled him. For indeed, she whom he had loved was a Marié of the Vanyar, and she went not with him into exile. Talk about a conversation killer. Hey brother, are you seeing anybody these days? Your question has just spawned a vision of my impending death. Please pass the potatoes. Anyway, yes, dramatic. This passage shows you Finrod's mindset at this time of his life. His true love, Amarié, is back in the West. He left her out of a perceived duty to the Noldor. He made a choice to reject love. He has just had a vision of his impending death, and the destruction of his realm. And he has the gift of prophecy, which we'll see later as well. And because of the doom of Mandos, he has no reason to think he will be reborn once he dies. Spoiler alert, he does get reborn. So that guy, with that mindset, is talking with Andreth around the year 410. The beginning of their talk revolves around the recent death of Andreth's grandfather, Boron, not the element, at the age of 93. That leads to a rather lengthy discussion of the difference between elven and human lifespans. It's an interesting chat, but it's not on the theme of love and friendship, so I'll just sum it up with this quote from Finrod. The debate of Finrod and Andreth. Thus far, then, I perceive that the great difference between elves and men is in the speed of the end. In this only. For if you deem that for the Quendi there is no death ineluctable, you err. Now, none of us know, though the Valar may know, the future of Arda, or how long it is ordained to endure. But it will not endure forever. You see us, the Quendi, still in the first ages of our being, and the end is far off. As maybe among you, death may seem to a young man in his strength, save that we have long years of life and thought already behind us. But the end will come. That we all know. And then we must die. We must perish utterly, it seems, for we belong to Arda. And beyond that, what? The going out to no return, as you say. The uttermost end, the irremediable loss. Our hunter is slow-footed, but he never loses the trail. I did not know this, said Andreth. And yet at least ours is slow-footed, you would say? Said Finrod. Now, let me say up front that I love the character of Finrod. He's top-tier elven royalty. He demonstrates all the traits of a true epic hero. But his logic here is terrible. It sounds really patronizing, actually. I guess I'm letting my pro-human bias show through. I'm glad Andreth calls him out when she says, I did not know this, and yet... He basically says, I can empathize with your human mortality, because we elves also die. Or we will when the world ends. Okay. I mean, it's great, because it does sound like something someone would say who has no frame of reference for what a 90-year lifespan is like. He can't process that. Andreth is approaching 50 years old at this point, and she's going to pass away at around age 95. And Finrod can say with a straight face, yep, just like us. You live for 90 years, we live for a few million. You know, it's basically the same. No, it isn't. It isn't at all. I'm calling BS on that one. I do really like the line, our hunter is slow-footed, but he never loses the trail. It's awesome prose. Tolkien at his best. But there's slow, and there's wait till the end of the world slow. The advantage for humanity is that our spirits can leave Arda, while elves' lives are tied to the land. So, this gap in mortality between elves and humans is described as a gulf between them. And this is where the conversation turns to Aegnor. Because one of the reasons Aegnor and Andreth are not currently together is that gulf. A couple of terms you'll hear in this next quote. One is Eichenar, that's another name for Aegnor. And the other term is Adoneth. Finrod uses it when talking to Andreth. Adoneth basically means woman. Across the gulf that divides our kindreds, said Andreth, is there no bridge but mere words? And then she wept again. There may be. For some, I do not know, he said. The gulf, maybe, is between our fates, rather. For else we are close akin, closer than any other creatures in the world. Yet perilous is it to cross a gulf set by doom. And should any do so, they will not find joy upon the other side, but the griefs of both, so I deem. But why dost thou say mere words? Do not words overpass the gulf between one life and another? Between thee and me, surely more has passed than empty sound. Have we not drawn near at all? But that is, I think, little comfort to thee. I have not asked for comfort, said Andreth. For what do I need it? For the doom of men that has touched thee as a woman, said Finrod. Dost thou think that I do not know? Is he not my brother dearly loved? Aegnor, the sharp flame, swift and eager. And not long are the years since you first met, and your hands touched in this darkness. Yet then thou wert a maiden, brave and eager, in the morning upon the high hills of Dorthonion. Say on, said Andreth. Say, who art now but a wise woman alone? An age that shall not touch him has already set winter's gray in thy hair. But say not thou to me, for so he once did. I was young, and I looked on his flame, and now I am old and lost. He was young, and his flame leaped towards me, but he turned away, and he is young still. Do candles pity moths? Or moths candles when the wind blows them out? Said Finrod. Aegnor, I tell thee, Aegnor the sharp flame loved thee. For thy sake now he will never take the hand of any bride of his own kindred, and live alone to the end, remembering the morning in the hills of Dorthonion. But too soon in the north wind his flame will go out. Foresight is given to the Eldar in many things not far off, though seldom of joy. And I say to thee, thou shalt live long in the order of your kind, and he will go forth before thee, and he will not wish to return. Then Andreth stood up and stretched her hands to the fire. Then why did he turn away? Why leave me while I still had a few good years to spend? Another great turn of phrase is, do candles pity moths? Or moths candles when the wind blows them out? Awesome prose. So here is where Finrod brings up his brother's love for Andreth. They met, they fell in love. She wanted their relationship to continue, but he turned away. And as we'll see, he did so without explaining why. He ghosted her. Finrod points out that Aegnor has lived alone ever since, and we know that Andreth has also lived alone. They both have given up on love, as did Finrod. And remember, I mentioned Finrod's gift of foresight. Here we see it again. He has foreseen that Aegnor will die before Andreth. And once in the West, even if he is reborn, he will not return to Middle-earth. And indeed, Aegnor is slain in the Battle of Sudden Flame, shortly before an elderly Andreth passes away. Finrod may or may not have shared that information with his brother, although he did share the vision of his own demise with Galadriel. But it's interesting that Aegnor has another 50 years max to live. And again, there's no guarantee that he'll ever leave the halls of Mandos. The Doom of Mandos basically says the Noldor will not be reborn. That's your curse. So this is it for him. He basically has a human-length lifespan left. And yet, he turns away from a chance at happiness. Why? This is what Andreth asks. Why did he turn away? Finrod attempts to provide the answer. Alas, said Finrod, I fear the truth will not satisfy thee. The Eldar have one kind, and ye another, and each judges the others by themselves, until they learn, as do few. This is time of war, Andreth, and in such days the elves do not wed or bear child, but prepare for death or for flight. Aegnor has no trust, nor have I, in this siege of Angband that it will last long. And then what will become of this land? If his heart ruled, he would have wished to take thee and flee far away, east or south, forsaking his kin and thine. Love and loyalty hold him to this. What of thee to thine? Thou hast said thyself that there is no escape by flight within the bounds of the world. For 1 year, 1 day of the flame, I would have given all, kin, youth, and hope itself, Aegnor as I am, said Andreth. That he knew, said Finrod, and he withdrew, and did not grasp what lay to his hand, elder as he is. For such barters are paid for in anguish that cannot be guessed until it comes, and in ignorance, rather than in courage, the Eldar judge that they are made. So Finrod says that this is a time of war, and elves do not wed in a time of war. Well, that sounds pretty simple. Cut and dried. What could Aegnor do? A rule's a rule. But is it? Remember when this is happening. The year 410. Andreth and Aegnor probably met around the year 380-ish. Okay, in the year 60, the good guys were at their zenith. They trounced Morgoth in Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle, which began the siege of Angband, the year 60. Yes, there were some lesser battles fought after that, the last of which was when the elves defeated a young Glaurung, sending him scurrying back to Angband in the year 260. That began a period of time known as the Long Peace. Over 100 years into the Long Peace is when Aegnor meets Andreth. As I mentioned before, this is the most peaceful era in the First Age. I get it, Finrod and Aegnor don't think it'll last. But by that logic, there was no time any elf in Middle-earth could get married in the First Age. It sounds like an excuse. Yeah, we're in the middle of the Long Peace, but there's no guarantees, so let's not see each other ever again. And Finrod throws a dig at Andreth with that last line. Andreth says, I would have given up everything, even hope itself, to be with Aegnor for even a short time. And Finrod's response is essentially, that sentiment is spoken in ignorance rather than courage. In other words, you're misguided, and Aegnor saved you a lot of pain, which is pretty harsh. But I think Finrod senses this is not a compelling argument for why Aegnor left Andreth, so he offers up another reason. Nay, Ardeneth, if any marriage can be between our kindred and thine, then it shall be for some high purpose of doom. Brief it will be, and hard at the end. Yea, the least cruel fate that could befall would be that death should soon end it. But the death is always cruel for men, said Andreth. I would not have troubled him when my short youth was spent. I would not have hobbled as a hag after his bright feet, when I could no longer run beside him. Maybe not, said Finrod. So you feel now. But do you think of him? He would not have run before thee. He would have stayed at thy side to uphold thee. Then pity thou wouldst have had in every hour, pity inescapable. He would not have had thee so shamed. Andreth, Ardeneth, the life and love of the Eldar dwells much in memory, and we, if not ye, would rather have a memory that is fair but unfinished than one that goes on to a grievous end. Now will he ever remember thee in the sun of morning, and that last evening by the water of Ailuin, in which he saw thy face mirrored with a star caught in thy hair, ever, until the north wind brings the night of his flame. Yea, and after that, sitting in the house of Mandos, in the halls of awaiting, until the end of Arda. And what shall I remember? Said she. And when I go, to what halls shall I come? To a darkness in which even the memory of the sharp flame shall be quenched? Even the memory of rejection. That, at least. So Finrod sums up his feelings on any elven-human pairing by saying, the least cruel fate that could befall would be that death should soon end it. I'm getting a strong vibe that Finrod is not a fan of elves marrying humans. And Andreth has a great response. The end is always cruel for men. In other words, yeah, someone will eventually die and their partner will be grief-stricken. So? In her case, she's just been told by Finrod that she'll be the one grieving over Aegnor's body. And she accepts that outcome. Because of course you do! It's just a concept that goes whoosh, right over Finrod's head. Finrod is now metaphorically in the corner, just getting pummeled in this debate. So in desperation, he brings out what I consider to be his weakest argument yet. Hey, Aegnor would have pitied you as you got older, and he would have stayed by your side, which is just terrible for some reason. Again, remember, he's going to die before she does. And then he says, now will he ever remember thee in the sun of morning? In other words, wouldn't it be better if he just carried a memory of you in your youth, instead of remembering old you? Like, what? This makes elves sound very petty and trivial. And again, Andreth comes back with a nice jab. And what shall I remember? Her point is that since she's not going to the halls of Mandos, her memories might be all erased. Even the memory of the sharp flame shall be quenched? Even the memory of rejection, that at least. Bang! Knockout! At least when I die, I won't remember your brother's completely unwarranted rejection. So, the debate is now over. In my opinion, there's a clear winner. And Finrod drops the defense of his brother. Knowing that he and Andreth will likely never speak again, he offers a very touching farewell. Darkness fell in the room. He took her hand in the light of the fire. "Whither go you?" she said. "North away," he said, "to the swords and the siege and the walls of defense, that yet for a while in Beleriand rivers may run clean, leaves spring, and the birds build their nests ere night comes. Will he be there, bright and tall, and the wind in his hair? Tell him not to be reckless, not to seek danger beyond need." "I will tell him," said Finrod, "but I might as well tell thee not to weep. He is a warrior, Andreth, and a spirit of wrath. In every stroke that he deals, he sees the enemy who long ago did thee this hurt. But you are not for Arda. Whither you go, may you find light. Await us there, my brother and me." I particularly appreciate the line, "Whither you go, may you find light." It's a very moving sentiment. And I know I've been tough on Finrod in this debate, but he is just doing what he thinks is right. And he's now off to join the siege for another 45 years before the Battle of Sudden Flame. From this text, I think that prior to this conversation with Andreth, Finrod, and likely his brother, are convinced that elven-human relationships can't work, primarily because of this mortality issue. But I think Andreth's impassioned words change his mind. And at the Battle of Sudden Flame, Andreth's nephew, Barahir, saves Finrod's life, and Finrod swears an oath to aid him and his family. 10 years later, Barahir's son, Beren, Andreth's great-nephew, comes to Finrod's court requesting aid. Silmarillion, Chapter 19. Thus Beren came before King Finrod Felagund, and Felagund knew him, needing no ring to remind him of the kin of Beor and of Barahir. Behind closed doors they sat, and Beren told of the death of Barahir, and of all that had befallen him in Doriath, and he wept, recalling Luthien and their joy together. But Felagund heard his tale in wonder and disquiet, and he knew that the oath he had sworn was come upon him for his death, as long before he had foretold to Galadriel. Here is a fitting ending to this debate. Finrod is honoring his oath, knowing it will result in his death, in order to help Andreth's great-nephew Beren, from the world of men, pull off a seemingly impossible task, take a Silmaril from Morgoth, in order to marry the love of his life, the daughter of the elven king Thingol, Luthien. He's prepared to lay down his life in service to the first elven-human marriage. And this is very much in the time of war, by the way. So just to complete Finrod's arc, here is the passage in which he saves Beren's life at the cost of his own. This is also from the Silmarillion, Chapter 19. In the pits of Sauron, Beren and Felagund lay, and all their companions were now dead. But Sauron purposed to keep Felagund to the last, for he perceived that he was a Noldo of great might and wisdom, and he deemed that in him lay the secret of their errand. But when the wolf came for Beren, Felagund put forth all his power and burst his bonds, and he wrestled with the werewolf and slew it with his hands and teeth. Yet he himself was wounded to the death. Then he spoke to Beren, saying, "I go now to my long rest in the timeless halls beyond the seas and the mountains of Aman. It will be long ere I am seen among the Noldor again, and it may be that we shall not meet a second time in death or life, for the fates of our kindreds are apart. Farewell." He died then in the dark, in Tol in Gawroth, whose great tower he himself had built. Thus King Finrod Felagund, fairest and most beloved of the house of Finwë, redeemed his oath. But Beren mourned beside him in despair. Dramatic, emotional scene. And again, I think it's fitting that one of Andreth's kin is mourning over the body of one of Aegnor's kin. So the tragedy of the relationship that never was, between Andreth and Aegnor, starts a ripple effect that leads to change. And while yes, as Finrod said, there will be grief and sorrow in the elven-human relationships to come, including Beren and Luthien, there will be great joy and love as well. And those relationships will stand as a symbol, uniting elves and men for ages to come. So there you have it, my humble entry on love and friendship. Thanks to all the commenters who requested this topic, and happy Tolkien Reading Day, everyone. Make sure you check out the rest of the videos in the Tolkien Reading Day playlist. Thanks again. Bye.